All right, well, we're finishing up Matthew. So we're in Matthew 26, and we're in the Passion, which we don't always get to sit and really talk about. All right. Does someone want to start reading on Matthew 26?
I'll start.
Okay.
When Jesus had finished saying all these things, he said to his disciples, "You know that after 2 days the Passover is coming, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified." Then the chief priests and the elders of the people gathered in the palace of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas, and they conspired to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him. But they said, "Not during the festival, or there may be a riot among the people." Now while Jesus was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, a woman came to him with an alabaster jar of very costly ointment, and she poured it on his head as he sat at the table. But when the disciples saw it, they were angry and said, "Why this waste? For this ointment could have been sold for a large sum and the money given to the poor." But Jesus, aware of this, said to them, "Why do you trouble the woman? She has performed a good service for me. For you always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me. By pouring this ointment on my body, she has prepared me for burial. Truly, I tell you, wherever this good news is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in remembrance of her." Then one of the 12, who was called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, "What will you give me if I betray him to you?" They paid him 30 pieces of silver, and from that moment he began to look for an opportunity to betray him. On the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus, saying, "Where do you want us to make the preparations for you to eat the Passover?" He said, "Go into the city to a certain man and say to him, 'The teacher says, my time is near. I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples.'" So the disciples did as Jesus had directed them, and they prepared the Passover meal. When it was evening, he took his place with the 12, and while they were eating, he said, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me." And they became greatly distressed and began to say to one another, "Surely not I, Lord." He answered, "The one who has dipped his hand into the bowl with me will betray me. The Son of Man goes as it is written of him, but woe to that one by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that one not to have been born." Judas, who betrayed him, said, "Surely not I, Rabbi." He replied, "You have said so." While they were eating, Jesus took a loaf of bread, and after blessing it, he broke it, gave it to his disciples, and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." Then he took a cup, and after giving thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will never again drink of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." When they had sung the hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Should I keep going?
We can pause for a second. Is there anything that strikes you?
I was surprised that in this particular version of the story, the anointing is done on the head as opposed to the feet that we so frequently do for our Passion play.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting too.
I also had to notice, it reminds me that we're so used to smashing the four Gospels together, we don't hear the differences. She's not crying. She's not called a sinner. She comes in very intentionally and does this, and the anointing on the head is probably like, that's how you anointed priests and prophets. So she knew exactly what she was doing, and Jesus understood what she was doing. And I find that interesting how each of the Gospels, they tell it differently of what her intention is and who she was.
And it doesn't say she's Mary.
No, it doesn't say, yeah,
A woman.
just a woman. And the only criticism is that the money should have been given to the poor. Yeah.
So this isn't a serving thing. Instead, it's fancy stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, extravagant.
Extravagant, yeah.
Yeah.
Which seems to be going against what you've been teaching us all along. So now they're confused.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it was used for embalming too.
Yep.
Yes, it was, which is, I got to be slightly creepy too, especially when he says, "Prepared my body for burial."
Yeah.
Like, eh?
Well, women would go and anoint dying people to prepare them for the journey, and then after they were done, they would wash and prepare and wrap the body, which was denied the women, which is why they were going to do it on Sunday morning. So she's doing this preemptively, and then Mary Magdalene and her friends were going to do the secondary proper pieces. And of course, there's people who say that this may be Mary Magdalene doing this, and they just intentionally obscured her identity.
Doesn't at least one of the other Gospels, though, say it was that other Mary, Martha's sister?
Yeah, and John, the Gospel of John, it's Mary of Bethany,
Yeah.
who does it in response to Lazarus being raised from the dead. But that is also interesting because some people think Mary of Bethany and Mary Magdalene are the same, and they, again, split them up.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. Basically, it's a really fascinating book I read from a biblical scholar, and she said that there's some believability to the fact that Mary Magdalene was so powerful they had to hide her power behind different identities. Either way, whether you believe that or not, it is said differently in each story, and I kind of wonder why. Obviously it happened because it's in every story, but they have the details different.
Well, there's a lot of stories that show up in more than one gospel with different twists on them.
Yep.
There's a different message they're trying
Yep.
to convey, or something different flavor of it that
Yeah.
seemed important to that gospel writer.
Yeah.
Which makes sense,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
The other thing that struck me here is that Judas actually seeked out the chief priest to betray Jesus. I thought, I had it in my head that they approached him. I don't know.
Yeah.
I have to take some of the scenes, if you will, of the act of betrayal with a bit of a grain of salt, because I doubt if Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John was there when Judas was
Right.
actually talking with the priest, that wouldn't have taken place because it would have been too out in the open. They would have spoken
nobody
up,
knows,
and
yeah.
so they're just filling it in with their own take of filling in what they think probably transpired roughly, and who knows if it was even exactly 30 pieces of silver.
Right.
Something that is omniscient narrator.
Yeah.
Should we keep going? Do you want to keep reading, Christy, or somebody else?
I can go.
Okay.
Then Jesus said to them, "You will all become deserters because of me this night. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go ahead of you to Galilee." Peter said to him, "Though all become deserters because of you, I will never desert you." Jesus said to him, "Truly I tell you, this very night, before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times. Peter said to him, "Even though I must die with you, I will not deny you." And so said all the disciples. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, and began to be grieved and agitated. Then he said to them, "I am deeply grieved, even to death. Remain here and stay awake with me." And going a little farther, he threw himself on the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not what I want, but what you want." Then he came to the disciples and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, "So, could you not stay awake with me 1 hour? Stay awake and pray that you may not come into the time of trial. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." Again he went away for the 2nd time and prayed, "My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." Again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. So leaving them again, he went away and prayed for the 3rd time, saying the same words. Then he came to the disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? See, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand."
I just want to point out something that's really interesting. In 25, Matthew 25, Jesus talks a lot about stay awake, keep awake. You never know when the hour is going to come. And then in the very next chapter, the disciples cannot physically stay awake when Judas and the betrayer comes. And I think that's an intentional parallel. And of course, just a metaphor in general for probably any of us is, are you awake to what's actually happening? So,
Again, I have to take it worth of. I mean, this story does appear in the other Gospels, which is interesting. But considering that Jesus took Peter and the two sons with him, so Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were not present for this, and that those that were present for it kept falling asleep. How do we know the dialogue of what Jesus is saying? Again, the author is filling in the blanks with what he.
Oh, yeah.
Although it is fairly consistent with what blanks get filled in,
True.
interestingly. So,
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that sort of callback to the previous chapter. We tend to lose that because in church we usually read part of a
yes,
chapter.
exactly.
And so we forget that. It's kind
Yeah.
of nice reading it this way.
Yeah, there's a lot of that happens in the Bible where they put one story next to another story for reasons, but then we usually just read the one.
Right.
So,
or
yeah.
even just a few passages of the one.
Yeah.
So we
It's
lose a lot of
fragmented.
context by doing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we have to bear in mind the audience's attention span too.
Yeah.
Yes. TikTok.
All right, I'll finish 26, then I'll stop.
Sure.
While he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. With him was a large crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one I will kiss is the man. Arrest him." At once he came up to Jesus and said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. Jesus said to him, "Friend, do what you are here to do." Then they came and laid hands on Jesus and arrested him. Suddenly, one of those with Jesus put his hand on his sword, drew it, and struck the slave of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Then Jesus said to him, "Put your sword back into its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels? But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled, which say it must happen in this way?" At that hour, Jesus said to the crowds, "Have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me as though I were a bandit? Day after day I sat in the temple teaching, and you did not arrest me. But all this has taken place so that the scriptures of the prophets may be fulfilled." Then all the disciples deserted him and fled. Those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas the high priest, in whose house the scribes and the elders had gathered. But Peter was following him at a distance, as far as the courtyard of the high priest, and going inside, he sat with the guards in order to see how this would end. Now the chief priests and the whole council were looking for false testimony against Jesus, so that they might put him to death. But they found none, though many false witnesses came forward. At least 2 came forward and said, "This fellow said, 'I am able to destroy the temple of God and to build it in 3 days.' The high priest stood up and said, 'Have you no answer? What is it that they testify against you?' But Jesus was silent. Then the high priest said to him, 'I put you under oath before the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God.' Jesus said to him, 'You have said so, but I tell you, from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven.' Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, 'He has blasphemed. Why do we still need witnesses? You have now heard this blasphemy. Where is your verdict?' They answered, 'He deserves death.' Then they spat in his face and struck him, and some slapped him, saying, 'Prophesy to us, you Messiah. Who is it that struck you?' Now Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard. A servant girl came to him and said, 'You also were with Jesus the Galilean.' But he denied it before all of them, saying, 'I do not know what you are talking about.' When he went out to the porch, another servant girl saw him, and she said to the bystanders, 'This man was with Jesus of Nazareth.' Again he denied it with an oath, 'I do not know the man.' After a little while, the bystanders came up and said to Peter, 'Certainly you are also one of them, for your accent betrays you.' Then he began to curse, and he swore an oath, 'I do not know the man.' At that moment the cock crowed. Then Peter remembered what Jesus had said, 'Before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times.' And he went out and wept bitterly."
I found this one interesting that in this stanza, well, first of all, it's interesting that Jesus had disciples who were with him that were armed. I don't know how typical it was back in those days for people to be carrying swords at their sides. I mean, yes, I realize that there are wild animals that might attack them on the trails and whatnot, and there were bandits, of course, and highwaymen. And then it points as a man. It doesn't say Peter, as we oftentimes hear being associated as the man who cuts off the ear.
Yep.
So, again, more subtle differences in the way the story is told.
Yep.
But then, of course, it is Peter who follows. And they don't. Another subtle difference is they don't think they mentioned Jesus healing the cut ear either.
And why would Judas have to kiss him? Everyone knew who Jesus was. They were after him forever. So why would there need to be that? Like, make sure you arrest the right guy.
Actually, not necessarily. I recently read something about that. It felt obvious. Exactly your point. He had to point out the right guy because who did Judas bring with him?
A large crowd with swords and clubs
from
the chief priests
the chief
and
priests and the elders.
Yeah.
So this could have just been a mob, almost like a hired mob that
That's
may
true, I guess.
not have really known who he was. We sort of think everyone would be able to recognize his face and know who he was, but there were hundreds of thousands of people that would come in and out of Jerusalem on festival days. They couldn't all have known who he was.
I'm sure he looked like any other Jew.
Yeah.
And they didn't have TikTok or the
No.
nightly news or newspapers and cameras and whatnot.
Yeah, I guess I pictured it like the people that were after him, but no, if they just sent
Yeah.
randoms, yeah.
Yeah, and that, again, is one of those things you read it over and over again, and someone has to point it out to you to see it. So they were just kind of doing what they were told and arresting a guy that, that's what you do.
It struck me, I want to change the subject, it struck me when he said, "Friend, do what you need to do," or what you're here to do.
Yeah, well, Jesus knew
He
that.
knows.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean,
You
friend,
know?
Yeah.
he could have just said, "Okay, do what you need to do."
So that must have twisted the knife a bit too.
Huh?
That must have hurt.
Well, again, I was wondering, is it sarcasm?
I don't think it was sarcasm, but
Well.
it still must have hurt.
Yeah,
Jesus knew that Judas was playing the part that was laid out for him in this case.
yeah.
And again, do what you need to do, what you must do. And he knew that Judas was going to betray him, and he did nothing to stop Judas from doing so. We assume because he knew that this was the role that was laid out for him.
Well, or he just couldn't. I mean, if you have somebody who's known you for 3 years, let's say, roughly, and has been with you every day, what more can you do to show them your character? You have. There's nothing Jesus could have done. Judas's own mind was made up. Who he believed Jesus was, or should be, did not match up with the Jesus he was seeing. We don't fully understand his motivations, but he was not converted to the way of Jesus at this point. There's nothing more Jesus could have said. This is a great example of Jesus letting people be themselves, not controlling them, not forcing them, not manipulating them. He's like, I have been consistent with integrity about who I am this whole time. I called you. You've seen me for what I am, and you reject it. That's your choice. I'm going to let you carry on with your path. And yet, I think the friend shows that Jesus realizes the problem is with Judas and still loves him because he maybe sees who Judas could be without this illness, this mistake, this wrong seeing. And that's what I find so profound about this story, is that now things are getting really rough. And how does Jesus act? Does he abandon his act of being nice and become a jerk and like condemn people and accuse people. No, he doesn't. This is who he is. Yes, he calls his betrayer friend. And he doesn't argue with the Pharisees, and he doesn't tell Pilate he's going to hell in a handbasket. And when he comes back from the dead, he forgives Peter, and he forgives everybody, because that's who he is. And I find that so powerful. And that is a revelation of who God is. So, yeah, we can curse God till we're blue in the face, and God comes to us and says, friend, what are you doing? It says something about who God is. And I think that's powerful. So I don't think it's sarcasm. I think Jesus is incredibly sad that one of his own that he saw the best in could not see what he was trying to do. Couldn't get it. And I know that that happens. I think we may have all experienced moments in our life where I had this woman confront me years ago after, in the hallway on a Tuesday afternoon or whatever, just upset because of some children's sermon that I had preached where I was talking about sharing. And she thought I was getting into socialism and communism, and that it was like, she was very disturbed and bothered, and she's like, you're preaching political stuff, you know. She just started talking about things in a way that I didn't recognize myself. I didn't recognize that that is anything I stood for. And I understood this was how she was seeing the world. This was her filter. And there was nothing I could do or say that was going to change how she saw me. I was dangerous to her. And so I simply just said, well, I'm glad you came and talked to me. I always encourage people to come and talk to me if they're concerned about something. And she just sort of backed away from me, and I never saw her again. There's nothing I could do. If I legitimately said something painful, I try to own up to that. But in this case, she just saw me how she saw me, and there was nothing I could do.
That could be
she
such a
wasn't living.
good thing, because I would like to be a threat to some people's thinking.
You missed that, John, sorry.
I said, that's a good thing. I would like to be a threat to somebody's thinking.
Okay.
Sure. I mean, Jesus was, right? That's why he was killed, was who he was to his core, and what he represented and revealed was a danger to systems of violence and well, you hit me, I'm going to hit you, you know. The zealots and people were frustrated with him because he wasn't fighting back in a violent way. He wasn't who they wanted him to be, because that was the only system they understood. They dominate us, we fight back. And Jesus was trying to show a third way. Yeah. Well, let's get to 27 here. This is another long one. Jacob, do you want to read?
Sure. When the morning came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people conferred together against Jesus in order to bring about his death. They bound him, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate the governor. When Judas, his betrayer, saw that Jesus was condemned, he repented and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders. He said, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. But they said, who is that, or what is this to us? See to it yourself. Throwing down the pieces of silver in the temple, he departed, and went and hanged himself. But the chief priests, taking the pieces of silver, said, it is not lawful to put them into the treasury, since they are blood money. After conferring together, they used them to buy the potter's field as a place to bury foreigners. For this reason, that field has been called the field of blood to this day. Then was fulfilled what would have been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. And they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of the one on whom the price had been set, on whom some of the people of Israel had set a price, and they gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord commanded me. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus said, "You say so." But when he was accused by the chief priests and elders, he did not answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many accusations they make against you?" But he gave him no answer, not even a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. Now at the festival, the governor was accustomed to release a prisoner for the crowd, anyone whom they wanted. At that time, they had a notorious prisoner called Jesus Barabbas. So after they had gathered, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release to you, Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who is called the Messiah?" For he realized that it was out of jealousy that they had handed him over. While he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him, "Have nothing to do with that innocent man, for today I have suffered a great deal because of a dream about him." Now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus killed. The governor again said to them, "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" And they said, "Barabbas." Pilate said to them, "Then what should I do with Jesus who is called the Messiah?" All of them said, "Let him be crucified." Then he asked, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Let him be crucified." So when Pilate saw that he could do nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took some water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves." Then the people as a whole answered, "His blood be on us and on our children." So he released Barabbas for them, and after their flogging of Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified.
All right, I want to pause and just talk about Barabbas. So it is very interesting that this guy's name is Jesus Barabbas, because Bar means son and Abbas means father. So his name is Jesus, son of the Father. And it is intentional, and he's also an insurrectionist. We learn that from various things. He's exactly who everyone thinks Jesus is. He's an insurrectionist whose name is a similar thing. So you're literally putting a parody, a caricature, the opposite of Jesus, and you're putting the two and you're saying, which do you prefer? And people choose the violent one. They see him as less of a threat than they do Jesus, which is fascinating. And I think it goes to show that how we can misjudge character and how we can be trained to choose our heroes unwisely in our culture. I also want to point out that my understanding of the purpose of Matthew having Pilate say, "I wash my hands," and the Jewish leaders saying, "His blood be on us and on our children," that has been used deeply anti-Semitically. It has been used against the Jewish people to say, you all for all of eternity are responsible for Jesus' death. Therefore, we can commit genocide and be awful towards you. So we just want to say that is awful, terrible, and not at all what Matthew's goal was. Matthew, this whole book is deeply Jewish. Everything about it is so steeped in the Hebrew scriptures. He's talking to his own people. I believe that Matthew's point was, we're not going to offload and say, oh, Jesus died because of the Romans, because of Pilate. Matthew's point was, no, we did this. This is what we do. We're the Jewish. They didn't call themselves Christians. They were Jews. These were their leaders. That was the whole point. It was putting this back on themselves to say, this is what we have done, is we've gotten rid of our Savior, our Messiah, and that is because that's what we've done in the past. We've killed prophets, and that's what we did this time. So I just think it's important to name that, because unfortunately there's still people who are into this anti-Semitic stuff, and they'll use a Bible verse like this, and it might throw us off. I think it's good for us to remember there is no anti-Semitism in the Bible because they were Semitic.
Yes.
So we have to view it differently. We have to understand they're talking about themselves and their own brothers and sisters. So I just want to name that.
I just lost my page. Oh, there we go. Feel right back to it. Okay, I think we're on 27.
Yep.
Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the governor's headquarters, and they gathered the whole cohort around them. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and after twisting some thorns into a crown, they put it on his head. They put a reed in his right hand and knelt before him and mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" They spat on him and took the reed and struck him on the head. After mocking him, they stripped him of the robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him away to crucify him. As they went out, they came upon a man from Cyrene named Simon. They compelled this man to carry this cross, and when they came to a place called Golgotha, which means place of the skull, they offered him a wine to drink mixed with gall. But when he tasted it, he would not drink it. And when they crucified him, they divided his clothes among themselves by casting lots. Then they sat down there and kept watch over him. Over his head they put a charge against him which read, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Then 2 bandits were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by derided him, shaking their heads and saying, "You who would destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." In the same way, the chief priests also, along with the scribes and elders, were mocking him, saying, "He saved others, but he cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him come down from the cross now, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God deliver him now, if he wants to, for he said, 'I am God's son.'" The bandits who were crucified with him also taunted him in the same way. From noon on, darkness came over the whole land, until 3 p.m. And about 3 o'clock, Jesus cried with a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani?" That is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of the bystanders heard it, they said, "This man is calling for Elijah." At once one of them ran and got a sponge, filled it with sour wine, put it in a stick, and gave it to him to drink. But the others said, "Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come down to save him." Then Jesus cried again with a loud voice and breathed his last. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two, from top to bottom. The earth shook, and the rocks were split. The tombs were also opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. After his resurrection, they came out of the tombs and entered the holy city and appeared to many. Now, when the centurion and those with him who were keeping watch over Jesus saw the earthquake and what took place, they were terrified and said, "Truly, this man was God's son." Many women were also there, looking on from a distance. They had followed Jesus from Galilee and had provided for him. Among them were Mary Magdalene, and Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. When it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who was also a disciple of Jesus. He went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered that it be given to him. So Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen cloth and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had hewn in the rock. Then he rolled a great stone to the door of the tomb and went away. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were sitting opposite the tomb. The next day, that is, the day after the day of the preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered before Pilate and said, "Sir, we remember what an impostor said while he was still alive. 'After 3 days I will rise again.' Therefore command the tomb to be made secure until the 3rd day. Otherwise his disciples may go and steal him away and tell the people he has been raised from the dead. And the last deception would be worse than the first." Pilate said to them, "You have a guard of soldiers. Go, make it as secure as you can." So they went to the guard and made the tomb secure by sealing the stone.
Okay. Couple of things I want to point out. The two bandits in Matthew, they're insurrectionists. That's another word for bandit, is they are insurrectionists. It's interesting that they don't recognize Jesus as one of their own. If they thought he was someone who was also violently resisting the Roman Empire, they would have been like, hey buddy, we're in this together, right? You know, isn't this terrible? But instead they make fun of him. So they saw him as representing something that they didn't respect. They did not respect his peaceful whatever it was, which is interesting. So everybody's kind of making fun of Jesus. It's almost like they're saying, what are you standing for? And if you really are who you say you are this powerful person, shouldn't you be able to do all this shock and awe? Shouldn't you be able to just come off the cross? They don't understand the gentleness of God. They need things to be loud and fast and violent, which is interesting because we often say the Old Testament is like a mean, angry God. It's not necessarily true, but there definitely are perspectives in which they interpreted things happening as punishment or consequences of God. If that's their mentality, then if Jesus is one of God's own, they might expect God to do something fancy, right? Mm-hmm. Which actually, when the earthquake happens and the darkness happens, that's actually what prompts the centurion and the others to go, uh-oh, maybe we did do something wrong. It's interesting how much we look for big, exciting, violent things to prove that something is right or whatever. And Jesus is just a very different animal in the way he behaves.
Yeah, if you think about some of the stories that we remember from the Old Testament, we think of the walls of Jericho coming down. We think of a burning bush. We think of fire coming from the sky to light the altar. We think of a whale coming to swallow the prophet who was reluctant to serve, and then puking him up on the shore to go on his mission.
Yeah, and there are definitely people among us who they see very loud, strong, bully-type people as being strong. They can't understand the quiet, meek person in the corner, the Tabithas, so to speak, right? There's all these Tabithas around the world doing amazing work who may have deep faith and wisdom, but nobody recognizes them because, you know, they're not loud and arrogant and don't know what to do about that. But I see in this moment how people are looking for Jesus to be like a, hey everybody, I'm so great, you know, blah, blah, blah. And they might actually respect that, but that's not who he is. I also want to notice, this is the only time where the tombs are open and saints walk around. It's a very strange reference.
Yeah.
And you'd think that would stand out in other books if that happened, or, I mean...
Yeah, it's very interesting. The last thing I just wanted to point out is that there's a difference between saying on the third day and 3 days. And I think every kid, at some point you do the math, and you're like...
Every year I do.
Oh yeah, you're like, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Yeah. That's less than 48 hours. How is that 3 days? It's not 3 days. It's on the third day. Friday's the first, Saturday's the second, Sunday's the third. Somehow we always want to say, use 3 days as, I don't know, it's just one of those little dumb pet peeves of mine where I just want to go, it's not 3 days, it's on the third day. Whatever.
It's like, is it index zero based or one based?
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's finish this up. We get a shorter chapter now. Kirsten, do you want to read 28?
After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And suddenly there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descending from heaven came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing white as snow. For fear of him, the guards shook and became like dead men. The angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid. I know that you're looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he has been raised, as he said. Come, see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has been raised from the dead, and indeed he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him. This is my message for you." So they left the tomb quickly with fear and great joy and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them and said, "Greetings!" And they came to him, took hold of his feet, and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee, where they will see me." While they were going, some of the guards went into the city and told the chief priests everything that had happened. After the priests had assembled with the elders, they devised a plan to give a large sum of money to the soldiers, telling them, "You must say his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. If this comes to the governor's ears, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble." So they took the money and did as they were directed. And this story is still told among the Jews to this day. Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and said to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded you. And remember, I am with you always, to the end of the age."
That's actually a fascinating ending. It happens so abruptly. It's like,
So,
yeah,
it's also some of the drama we're looking for.
yeah. A little earthquake, a little,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and it's got a hint of that, but still yeah.
something that strikes me about the report of the guard and how they want to bribe the soldiers to create a lie and a fabrication. It's interesting that when we're afraid of telling the truth, that's a red flag. Now, I understand the difference between, a 5-year-old asking where babies come from and how we're going to couch that truth differently from when they're 13 years old, right? There's a difference between how much information is appropriate to reveal at different times. But flat out lying and manipulating, and it's being revealed in our culture right now in America, how much underhanded manipulation, lying has happened in news networks and, Supreme Court, kind of all over in powerful leadership. And it's fascinating because that's a marker of really poor leadership, is being afraid of the truth. And I think one of the things we learn from Jesus is that when we learn to see things as they truly are and we're not afraid of the truth, we're not afraid to let it change us, that's going to lead to a better place eventually. The truth sets you free. It might make you miserable at first. It might bruise your ego deeply. It might even make you afraid, but following the truth is ultimately more life-giving. And then the last thing I'll say about this is that, so the 11 disciples gather with Jesus and worship him, but some doubted, which is interesting. And what's interesting is what Jesus does not say. He does not say, "Aren't we mad that they killed me? Man, those people are awful. We should definitely hate them forever." He says nothing about that. All he says is, "Oh, by the way, interesting weekend. So let's keep going with the ministry." It's just, the death did not stop the mission. Nothing can stop what God is doing. There might be detours, there might be roadblocks, but God's going to keep going. And I think that's really powerful. Jesus is like, "All right, you go out, keep going. Maybe something that happened, like what happened to me, will happen to you, but keep going."
Well, if he had changed, then there would have been doubt of, who is this man that is now coming forth, appearing to be him? I mean, as you said before, this is who he was.
Yeah.
For him to change, for him to suddenly start spouting vengeance and condemnation would not have been him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it reveals what's truly deep inside, So Jesus clearly even though he was afraid, he'd exercised any sense of judgment and hatred within himself, which is amazing. I think about moments in my life where people have triggered me and I said something rude or mean or just, I don't know, not quite right. And that was just revealing that under pressure, I still have something inside me. I still am holding on to maybe a prejudice or a need to be right, or there's something that you don't see when everything's great. But when we put pressure on ourselves, when we haven't slept enough,
Yeah.
when someone insults us, what comes out? And it's not a blame or judgment thing. It to me, it's just that's some healing that needs to happen. I still have more healing to do.
Yeah.
And Jesus is demonstrating that under the worst pressure possible, no venom came out at all. And how beautiful is that? And may we get that little of that rubbing off on us as well.
Yeah, it's like the OM3 talked to us yesterday at the
Yeah.
Synod Assembly, talking about letting the darkness in, but actually it's more a case of letting the darkness that a lot of theologies talk about there being light and dark inside of us all, and I think that's probably more accurate. I mean, the darkness gets into us when we're really young and we start getting teased by other kids, and we start teasing other kids. I mean, then it starts growing inside of us. Jesus didn't, I don't think he ever had much darkness inside of him. There were a few spots where he gets angry at the temple sellers, but even that was fairly tame compared to what others might do. But yeah, it's just
Well, always
letting
remember.
the dark out.
Yeah,
The darkness
always
getting
remember
out.
that Jesus went in the desert to be tempted, and therefore there must have been something that could tempt him. So I like the idea, I know it's very popular to believe that Jesus walked around loving perfectly his entire life and being perfect his entire life, and never did he do anything or say anything wrong. And I don't know about that. I like to think that when he was 5, there was some time he didn't listen to his mom and she got upset with him. But
Boy, that temple thing.
yeah, that maybe when he was 13 he said something rude to someone else. Maybe what made him different is that by the time he was ready for ministry, he was so in it to win it that temptation time burned out any of the junk inside of him that he might have collected as a human being, to prepare him to be a pure vessel for God for the rest of his ministry. And we can see through his death that that's what happened. But otherwise you can't relate to him. If he's standing there during the temptation going, "Ha ha, foolish devil, you can't tempt me," then it's not a temptation. It's only a temptation, and he's only relatable. He can only show us how to walk if he can actually relate to us. If he can actually say, yeah, well, I've been through some of that myself. So I just find that more interesting. I don't think it takes away anything. I think it adds to his credibility that there had to have been something in his life that was painful and hard.
It's like away in the manger, no crying he makes. I don't buy that. He
I
cried.
don't buy it. We gotta change those words.
Yeah,
He cried just like us.
One more point I'd just like to suggest, that
Yeah.
at least in the Gospel of Mark, he does something and then he goes off to pray. He says something, then he goes off to pray.
Yeah.
Something happens, then he goes off to pray. Pray, meditate, reflection, dealing with your demons, maybe.
Yeah.
What I remember learning, I didn't learn this at home, but for example, for husband and wife arguing, I was taught, just get on it, argue. No, do not discuss it while you're negatively energized.
Oh.
Yeah.
Deal with your negative energy first, and then you might be able to discuss it.
It's like the parenting classes that the hospital made us take.
Okay.
It's great. They're making all parents do that before you leave with the kid.
Yeah.
Which is really good.
Well, see, I
It
didn't have
helps.
that. I didn't have that.
That's
I
the
just
thing
had,
they do now.
Well, but I said I didn't have that, but I learned that later, and the idea being that, all right, both Mary and I have been doing it in our own way for how many years now? Where we do have negative feelings, but we don't act on it, we don't speak on it, out of that, because if we do, that's when we get hurtful.
Yes.
Right.
And then we're busy saying, I'm sorry later, and all that stuff. That doesn't help anyways, because it's been done. But you see what I'm getting at? That he's always going off to pray, so that, I'm not disagreeing with anything you're saying, but in terms of our humanness, do we make time after we've had our explosion, or our, to try to deal with it then?
I think Jesus, the reason why he could be so forgiving is he knows us. He knows. It's like telling a certain breed of a dog not to do something.
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
You know, so he knows us, and he knows that that's who we are. And
Human's gonna human.
yeah,
That's,
Tell a
yeah,
bear
that's
not
what I
to
say.
chase a squirrel.
Yeah, exactly. I look
We will.
outside, I go, squirrel's gonna squirrel as they jump into our bird feeder to try to get it. Can't get mad at them. They're hardwired to go, ooh, food, how can I get to it?
absolutely. And they're hardwired. We have more choice. Well, we're pretty hardwired too.
Yeah,
There's a
yeah.
lot of hardwired things in there.
Yeah,
And so, you know, you just go, whatever.
yep.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.